Hello and welcome to this video. I'm Ben Summers from Morris Hillman Productions, and today we'll be taking a look at the oldest building in Sydney's CBD. If you'd like to find out about future videos, please watch to the end for more details. In convict-era New South Wales, shipping was an even more important part of the state's transport industry than today, as it was one of the only ways of transporting people and freight. Naturally, these vessels required inspection, and this job fell to the inspector of government boats. Located at Circular Quay, Cadman's cottage was designed by architect Francis Greenway. Its first resident was Barnard Williams, who held the position of Inspector of Government Boats for 15 years, from 1807 to 1822, when he was replaced by David Smith. Smith himself was replaced by John Weiss for 3 years, before John Cadman, final holder of the role, was appointed. Cadman had an interesting backstory. Born in Britain in 1772, he started his working life as a publican. His path took a dramatic turn when, in 1797, he was convicted in the Worcester Assizes for stealing a chestnut gelding, an act which came with the death penalty, though this was subsequently commuted to transportation in his case. Arriving on the Barwell on May 18, 1798, he obtained a job as a labourer in Castle Hill. By 1816, he had been granted a conditional pardon, followed subsequently in 1821 by a full pardon. Later that year, he became the master of the government cutter Mars, which sailed the treacherous route between Sydney and Newcastle. In 1826, while sailing between Newcastle and Port Stephens, his vessel was shipwrecked. At about this time, new rules were introduced requiring the captains of vessels to maintain a log, a task Cadman couldn't perform as he was illiterate, so he petitioned the government for another job, and this came through his appointment to the role of Inspector of Government Boats, replacing John Weiss, who left to pursue a career as a missionary in the Pacific Islands. Cadman held this role for 18 years, from 1826 until 1845, when he retired. He and his wife had bought out a lease on the Steam Packet Hotel in 1843, and they began converting it into an inn. Cadman died in Parramatta on November 12, 1848, at the age of 76. His wife outlived him by 12 years, dying in 1860, and during her remaining years also became involved in business. Following the retirement of Cadman and the abolition of his position by Governor Sir George Gipps, the cottage, which now bears his name, was put to a variety of uses, ranging from the headquarters of the Water Police until passage of the Police Regulation Act in 1862 and the Sydney Sailors' Home Trust from 1864 to the 1930s. An interesting side note is the original plans for the Sailors' Home were much grander and required a demolition of the cottage, though funds for this could not be raised. None of this was able to stall the cottage's fall into dereliction and vacancy, which had occurred by the 1950s. In the 1970s, fortune would smile upon the then 154-year-old cottage when it, along with much of the rocks, was placed under the control of the Sydney Harbour Foreshore Authority following resumption of the area by the state government. Gazetted under the National Parks and Wildlife Act in 1972, a complete rebuild and restoration of this historic building was carried out. Today, Cadman's cottage provides a vital link to to the colonial days of New South Wales and Australia. Thanks for watching. I do have some more videos in the pipeline, including one about New South Wales surviving silent movie theatres. I have begun work on this video, which will be released later this year. Hello and welcome. In this video, I'll take you over the history of Sydney Terminal. Central Station has a long and storied history dating back to the early days of the New South Wales rail network. The Sydney Railway Company had been formed in 1849 to build a railway from Sydney to Parramatta. Another company was established in 1846 and called the Great Southern and Western Railway Company, which will be discussed in another video. In 1850, the Sydney Railway Company began work with a big celebration, possibly in Cleveland Paddock, attended by dignitaries including the governor's daughter, who turned the first sod. Sadly, the company's good fortunes didn't last, as it often suffered financial problems. In 1855, the company defaulted on its loan repayments, leading the colonial government of New South Wales to take over construction of the railway, becoming the first in the empire to do so. Originally, the Sydney Railway Company had planned a much bigger, grander terminus, though due to their financial woes, the design ultimately chosen was a tin shed with a timber platform. By the 1870s, this basic structure had become inadequate for the growing rail system, and it fell to Chief Engineer John Whitten to design a new station. By 1874, he'd drawn up plans for a larger brick structure with 2 platforms for arrivals or departures, though even this station became insufficient. Relocation of the city's railway terminal had been first proposed in 1877 by John Young, a builder and local prominent politician. Over the years, other important people made similar proposals, including the architect Norman Self and Railway Commissioner Edward Miller Guard Eddy, though these schemes came to nothing. In 1900, Henry Dean, Engineer-in-Chief of Railway Construction of the New South Wales Government Railways, took an overseas investigative trip. After he returned, he submitted new plans to the government, and it's the second that's relevant to our story. As part of this plan, the Devonshire Street Cemetery site was resumed in 1901 to become the site of the new station. That year, Edward William O'Sullivan, Public Works Minister, created the Central Station Advisory Board, which included government architect Walter Liberty Vernon, the 2 chief civil engineers of the New South Wales Government Railways, as well as their Victorian and Queensland counterparts. At the start of the resumption process, relatives of the deceased were allowed 2 months to organise the exhumation and removal of their loved ones' remains. Those which were unclaimed were removed to other cemeteries around the city, including Waverley and Rookwood, as well as the purpose-built Bunurong Cemetery. The station was designed by government architect Walter Liberty Vernon in Federation Free Classical style, while Henry Dean served as engineer in his capacity as Engineer-in-Chief of the New South Wales Government Railways. The new station opened to traffic on August 4, 1906, though passengers had to wait another day before they could use it. Also included was an enclosed tram stop referred to as Railway Colonnade. This is the area used by the present-day light rail. As well as that, an imposing clock tower was opened in 1921. In the 1920s, work began on electrifying the suburban lines. Consequently, platforms 18 and 19 were electrified, and the number of platforms making up the existing station cut to 15, with the new platform 16 to 23 taking their place. Building the electric platforms was part of a much wider electrification plan overseen by John Bradfield, including electrification of the suburban railway system and the building of the mighty Harbour Bridge. In 1948, the station gained 4 new platforms intended to serve the Eastern Suburbs Railway, though this project remained incomplete. Also in 1948, work began on the Southern Suburbs Railway, which would ultimately be abandoned, though the 2 incomplete platforms intended for this route remain. And it was these platforms which formed part of the 4 platforms mentioned in the previous sentence, to be absolutely clear. From 2018, Central Station underwent yet another major transformation when work commenced on building a brand new metro and the Central Walk. The Central Walk opened partially in November 2022 and opened fully during April 2023. The metro platforms opened in connection with the new metro on August 19th, 2024, giving the station the Southern Hemisphere's longest escalators at 45 metres long and 27 metres tall. 118 years after opening, Central Station is an essential component of Sydney's public transport network, seeing millions of passengers each year. Thank you very much for watching, and please like, subscribe and comment, as it really helps with YouTube's algorithm. Please subscribe to the channel for more content. Okay, thanks very much, folks. Bye. Right, so we're just walking along a section of the old tram line to Watson's Bay. We are actually on the route this time, and yeah, this is part of what's left of it. So we're walking down to Watson's Bay from New South Head Road, which is where we got off the bus, the 324 bus from the city. Now, the Watson's Bay line opened as a cable tram route in 1894, initially as far as Ocean Street, Edgecliff, and then it was extended in later years and also electrified. It initially closed in December 1949, but following public protest reopened in May 1950, though the line was curtailed to terminate in the CBD, or near near Hyde Park. It was Victoria Square, whereas the original terminus had been at Erskine Street Wharf. And then in 1960 the line closed again, and it was later turned into a walking track. The Watson's Bay terminus was at the Gap, and the reason the landing for the stairs at the Gap is so large, so is as wide as it is because that's where the trams used to terminate. And it was I think it was a 2-track terminus, though I could be wrong.
So the time he did the trial.
So now we're further down the route. So we're approaching the end. And yeah, it's interesting to be able to walk this and get a bit of a glimpse of the old Sydney tram system, which was very extensive, over 290 kilometres of track, which was which means it's one of the longest, one of the biggest tram systems in the world, and second biggest after London, and the biggest in Australia. Well, at least I think it might have been one of the biggest in the world. I'm not 100% certain. So yeah, we're approaching the Watsons Bay end of the line, which is where that where that car is, and very soon we'll get to the Gap, which was the terminus. And here we are at the ferry at the old terminus, which is just here, just where the stairs are. So yeah, this is it. That's the part of the Watsons Bay tram line which has been converted into a walking trail. So yeah, here it is. This is it, okay. So yeah, this is a part of the old Sydney tram network. Sydney had trams initially from 1861 to 1866, which were pulled by horses, and then 1879 to 1961, and the system used, and the latter system used steam, cable, horse and electric traction. I believe it's the only tram system in the world to have used all four types of traction simultaneously. I could be wrong, and I'm happy to be corrected about that. But yeah, anyway folks, this has been Ben Summers from Morris Hillman Productions, and I will see you in the next video. Okay, bye for now. Hello and welcome to this video, the fourth installment of Sydney History Snapshots. I'm Ben Summers from Morris Hillman Productions, and let's get started. In this episode, I'll be talking about the history of the Queen Victoria building. Since 1842, the site of the QVB has been managed by the City of Sydney and its predecessors. Originally, it was the location of the municipal markets and featured buildings designed by Gregory Blaxland and Ambrose Hallen. The following images are of the market buildings between the 1840s and 1870s and show the exterior and interior. They also show the Central Police Court, which partially occupied the site. In 1891, the land ceased to be used as a produce market and police court. It was purchased by the Sydney City Council for the construction of a new building, which had first been proposed in 1888. The foundation stone for the Queen Victoria building was laid by Lord Mayor Sir William Manning in December 1893. The Queen Victoria building was built between 1893 and 1898. The design is a mix of Richardsonian, Romanesque and Victorian styles. The building's architect was George McRae. George McRae, pictured, was born in Edinburgh, Scotland, on the 10th of September 1857 to Duncan and Mary McRae. George arrived in Sydney in 1884, obtaining the position of assistant architect in the office of the city architect. He had a brother, John McRae, who also found his calling in this profession. In 1889, George McRae was appointed to the position of city architect and city building surveyor, remaining in this role until 1897, when he became principal assistant architect to the government architect Walter Liberty Vernon, whom he replaced in 1912, serving until his death in 1923. Changes were also occurring in his personal life. He married Katie Prescott on the 8th of May 1895 in St Mark's Church, Darling Point. The union produced one son and two daughters. George McRae died in Sydney on the 10th of June 1923, aged 65, at his home on Glenmore Road, Rushcutters Bay, and was buried in Rookwood Cemetery. His wife, daughters and son survived him. During a long career, he designed buildings in and out of Sydney, including St James Station, the Department of Education building on Bridge Street, the former Parcel Post Office at Railway Square, Rozelle Tram Depot, Belmore Markets on Campbell Street, the Municipal Corporation building on Hay Street, and Cessnock Courthouse in the New South Wales Hunter Valley. He also completed the Sydney Town Hall, which had been started in 1869 and seen a succession of architects and building contractors in the 20 years before being finished in 1889. His design for the Queen Victoria building, as the QVB was known until 1918, incorporated engineering systems deemed advanced at the time. One such feature are the barrel form roofs, which are huge. Architectural historians consider him among the leading individuals behind the use of new materials and construction techniques. Building techniques of the period were rather stuffy and conservative, and McRae helped break this mould. In this chapter, I'll discuss the plans for the building, including side elevations, overhead views featuring shops, as well as frontal elevations and floor plans. These drawings give an insight into the building's exterior and interior layout. These allow a comparison to be made between how they looked as designed versus their appearance once modified. An interesting fact about the plans is they were drawn on drafting linen, because compared to the tracing paper of the period, it was considered a more robust material. Drafting linen remained the preferred choice for architects until replaced by polyester film during the 1960s. At the time of opening, the ground floor housed 58 shops, accommodating a range of tenants such as tailors, boot importers, florists, hairdressers, fruiterers, chemists, tobacconists, as well as a tea room. 17 large rooms, including offices, showrooms and warerooms, were situated on the first floor. Accommodated on the second floor was a gallery and 12 other rooms. The southern Druitt Street end boasted a coffee palace, 57 bedrooms, public and drawing rooms, a promenade and a gallery. The basement featured a cooling chamber, strong rooms, public toilets, cellars and wine bodegas, which is another word for wine rooms. By 1901, the tenants had changed greatly from those who had first operated out of the building, with just one tailor and the Singer Sewing Machine Company remaining from the original occupants. Their new neighbours were printers, Busby Wines, Lindeman's Wines, the Direct Fruit Supply Company, offices, the City Library, piano tuners, palmists, dance teachers, and clairvoyants. Also shown are plans from 1918 which outline the changes proposed by the council the previous year. These will be discussed in further detail in the next chapter. In 1898, the vast building opened to the public, with Mayor Matthew Harris attending the ceremony. In his speech, Harris remarked that, quote, "with judicious management, a marvellous centre of trade will be established here," unquote. The Lady Mayoress opened the Druitt Street entrance to the building, which had been named in honour of Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee in 1897. Illumination of the building was provided by roughly 1,000 Welsbach incandescent burners, equivalent to 70,000 candles, which produced floods of light, quote unquote. Even in the basement, the lighting was deemed, quote, perfect, unquote. Unfortunately, at the time, Mayor Harris's words proved optimistic, and by 1902, a mere 4 years after opening, Council was already worrying about the building being a, quote, non-paying asset and handicap. In 1913, a proposal to remodel the building was won by one vote, though work wouldn't commence until 1917, after which only minor modifications were made. That was until 1934. In 1933, with the city's use of electricity increasing, the council's electricity department needed larger premises to cope with its expanding size. Sydney Town Hall was now inadequate for it, so the QVB was selected as the replacement. In moving there, the electricity department joined the City Library, an occupant of the building since 1901. By the 1960s, the QVB was again facing an uncertain future, with many members of council favouring demolition. In 1967, the National Trust began calling for its preservation, with those advocating for its restoration also adding their voices, ultimately winning the day. In 1979, restoration work finally began. It was completed 7 years later in 1986. Today the building is under a 99-year lease to Ipoh Garden Berhard, the same company which undertook the restoration. Another restoration job would follow from 2006 to 2009. In the 21st century, the Queen Victoria building is living up to those hopeful words uttered by Matthew Harris 126 years ago. Long may its current renaissance continue. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment and subscribe for more content, including future uploads.